What's up guys, and welcome back to the shop. In today's video we're going to be talking about this beautiful Kearney Trecker 4H. Now this isn't going to be a machining video, we are just going to be talking about the machine, so if that's something you're into, stick around. Now before we get into what I did to restore this machine, I want to just give you a little bit of backstory. So I've wanted a horizontal mill for as long as I can remember, and I had it on my list of goals last year, but I didn't think I was going to get one just because I was really looking for a 3H. And when it comes to machinery, when you want something specific, I've learned that you really got to be patient and find the right machine. And a lot of times the wrong machine will come up, especially not in the configuration you want. So I wanted to be patient and get the right machine. I seen an ad on Craigslist for this machine for $1,000, and I really wasn't interested because it was a 4H and I thought it was going to be too big, and the price seemed way too good to be true. But I just kept coming back to it, as I often do with a lot of machines. That's what happened with the American. And thought I'd go take a look. It was like 2 hours away. I drove out there, took a look, and fell in love with the machine. And what was most surprising to me was the cost. And also the fact that I had an Acu-Rite digital readout installed already on it, and those, even though it was a little older, those are quite a bit of money, and a lot of older machines typically don't have that. And when I seen it in person, it actually wasn't as big as I thought it would be, so I wanted it. And it also included some tooling, and well, you know, when you see the tooling I got with it, that also made the price kind of amazing, and so I grabbed it. Now when I picked it up, it wasn't at all in this condition, and it was supposedly rebuilt, but at least partially, and the gentleman I got it from was a really nice gentleman. He actually took the knee apart, at least the gear feed box, and did some work in it, and the machine ran perfectly fine. There were definitely issues with the machine, but given the age, it was a well taken care of machine. So what actually makes this machine a little bit unique, not super unique, is it was actually rebuilt. While I was tearing this machine down to rebuild it, I found a little plaque underneath the label signifying that it was actually rebuilt at some point, either by Kearney Trecker or by a third-party rebuilder, which is kind of cool because a machine like this, you know, in the 40s, I think, is when it was made, being sent back to the factory and already having someone touch it and go through everything once really is great. It gives you a little bit of a leg up knowing that it's already been rebuilt once, at least to some extent. So I was really happy about that. And I got the machine back, and I really was just going to clean it up because I wanted to get to use it. I wanted to make some chips and get going with it. But as what tends to happen with a lot of my projects, I started to get going on it, and I tore it down, and I kept finding more and more problems. And I thought to myself, well, if I have this thing apart, even though I wasn't planning on doing a full restoration on it, I might as well do the best functional restoration I can without going too crazy, right? I wasn't going to do Bondo on the castings and take every last piece apart, but I did want to make sure that everything that was bad was fixed. And we actually fixed every issue on this machine except for one issue, and I'll share that with you later, to my knowledge at least. And we fixed quite a bit of things, and so it's in a really good condition. And then when I was getting it back together, we did a really nice paint job on it using this paint that I really like, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And it actually turned out looking great, and hopefully functioning great as well, because our primary focus was to get it functioning great. Now, one thing that's really sad about this machine is I actually have had this machine finished for about a year, and I haven't touched it until today. Kind of a good thing. I had a slower month last year, and I spent about a month and a half tearing this thing apart and going through each thing, put it back together, got it painted, and then I got real busy. And it's literally been sitting here like a table collecting dust for about a year, which is super sad. I've just been working on other projects and I haven't had a chance to put it through its paces and give it its first cut. And frankly, I didn't want to just turn it on and use it for a job. I wanted to take time, make a video, show its first cuts, and make sure that everything worked properly before I just jumped into it. So luckily we are getting back to it and we are going to get this thing running, but that is something a little bit funny and sad that it's really been finished waiting for me to turn it on and run it for about a year. So we're going to start over here on this side of the machine, and I'm going to work my way through the machine, just kind of explaining what we did, what problems it had, what things were good, and kind of go from there. So starting over here, there's not a whole lot to talk about. There were a couple leaks in this box. I actually took the whole gearbox and slid it out. It really clean on the inside. I didn't touch anything on the inside because it looked clean, and after talking with a couple other guys who were experts on this machine, they said that rarely anything on the inside of these needed to be serviced. So everything worked properly, all the speeds, no grinding. So we went ahead and just put this together without taking it apart. And we did have a couple leaks, like we had a leak down there by the sight glass on the bottom and up here at the top. And other than that, we just got everything together, got it sealed up, got it painted. Nothing too noteworthy on this side. We did new sight glasses, top and bottom. I took the filter out, cleaned it. Other than that, not too much over here. Moving along down to the bottom, this area was kind of interesting because this was one of the last things I did. See, it's still a little dusty. But I actually took this entire box off. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like a secondary rapid traverse, both for the X, Y, and Z. We took that apart. To be honest, I don't remember. I think there was a worn shaft or something in there that I remachined. Basically, I think this lever was broken, and it goes all the way through to the other side, and we replaced that on the other side. And then most of this stuff was just taking it apart, cleaning it. I took these dials, cleaned them up. They were unreadable. I think there was an issue here. If I remember right, the stops weren't working properly, so I addressed that. But other than that, in this area, nothing too crazy. I did do a whole new way wiper, like guard or whatever you call it, the actual metal piece up here by the way, and I did that. And then I also did new felt pieces and then made sure that everything was tight in the knee and that the tolerance in the slack was good, and it was. So I kind of left that alone. So that's pretty much everything over here. Let's talk about this table for a minute. So I actually removed this entire table, and this was before I had the jib crane in here. I think I did it with a forklift and maybe some weird techniques with an engine hoist. But I took the whole table off, took it apart. I had it upside down over on my old workbench, and we did a couple things. So the first thing, just kind of starting from left and working right, over here on the hand wheel, this wheel was bent, and so when you cranked it, it was kind of out around, and we went ahead and straightened that. And then we polished up this, which isn't really a big deal, but I cleaned up the knobs. A lot of these dials were just not readable, and I really wanted to make those readable. Moving along this way, I went ahead and took out all of the screens, and I'll give you like a better shot of that, but all of these screens are cleaned, and I actually went and flushed out all of the cavities by being able to flip the table over. So all these trays inside the table are clean and removed of chips from however many years, which is excellent. And then on a couple of these, I actually made new screens as well, which is really good. Other than the table itself, I did stone the table and make sure everything was flat and free of burrs and Scotch-Brite it up. That way that everything was good to go there. Nothing too eventful on the actual cast iron table itself. So moving right along, we're going to talk about this vise here in a minute. I'll leave that for the end, and we'll talk about this bar I have set up for the end as well. Most of the problems that this machine had were related to this region and below. So what I will say is I did not remove the knee, and I did not take anything out of the inner gearbox that I explained, but I pretty much did everything else. So when I got this machine, it had a bad, I don't know what you call this, I don't even remember, it's been so long. This rod here, it's some sort of feed rod, right, for cranking this axis. It was bent, right? So when you, and it I think was missing this handle. So like when you power traversed, the whole shaft would move, I don't know, like maybe 1/4 of an inch. It was like someone hit it with a forklift, and that bothered me. And then there's splines on the inside of this, which I'll give you a close-up, and the splines were smoked. So when you would engage the handle like this, you know, you have maybe a 1/16 of movement. You had like 3 times that. And I think it was the same on this shaft as well. And so in this region is where we did most of the heavy duty work. So starting at the top, this machine has all new lead screws and nuts everywhere except for the Z-axis, because I didn't take the knee off, and the Z-axis seemed to be fine-ish. All right, so I'll show you some close-up photos of this, but we went ahead and took the nut out of this for this axis right here, and I made a whole new nut. Now this original nut would have sucked to make the way they used to make them, because it's a huge piece of bronze. It's probably 2 inches in diameter and like 6 inches long. And it's, you know, coarse. I think it was Acme 1 3/4, 5 maybe, just going off my memory. But we went ahead and made a new nut, and I did a steel outer sleeve with a brass insert, so that way I could try to keep the cost down. We did a whole nut. I replaced the entire screw, and we did that using a technique that I showed in another video, where we saved the ends and we replaced the worn section in the middle. So the backlash in this machine on this table going back and forth is virtually nothing, right? A couple thousands. So that's brand new. Moving down back to this shaft, we replaced that shaft. I actually was able to source that from Ron Grundy, new old stock, so the shaft is not worn at all, it's brand new. And then I cut a new bronze nut for that travel. So the travel in this way and this way have new nuts and new shafts, which is amazing, because I knew I was going to be doing a lot of cutting, and I didn't know if I was going to be doing some climb milling. I didn't want a ton of backlash, right? So we have new nuts and new feed screws in both directions, so that was great. The other thing that we did is I took the saddle off and I cleaned out all of the wicking and removed all the old wicking and re-wicked the whole thing, which is a complete nightmare. Anyone who knows anything about doing these, you know, it sucks. But I did it. I made a new plate here, so that way you can add, you know, a little cool little knob or whatever. You can just make it look cool, and a nice brass washer. And we got our fresh wicks, you know, right in here. So you can, that's how you lubricate this machine, or one of the ways, is you add your whey oil in here. Actually, I don't even think it was whey oil back then. I want to say it was just straight 30 weight or something. You would add it in there and it would wick its way over to the various parts, both up under the table and down here. And that is one thing I probably would do over, is I was trying to be cost conscious when I was doing this, because we were pretty slow at the time. I really wanted to do a Bijur lubrication like we did on the other milling machine, but the reality was I didn't want to spend, you know, whatever it costs for the name brand stuff and then rerun everything. And when I talked to Ron Grundy, because he's an expert on these machines, he said that the wicking system works when it's working properly. So that's what I opted to do. So I left all the wicks, well, I replaced them, but I left that style of system in place. The other thing that we did, talking about this region here, is we went ahead and replaced all the whey wipers with new felt whey wipers. I went ahead and scraped in the knee and the saddle and not the table. The table didn't get scraped in, but the saddle on the top and bottom and the knee. Now, this is the first time I scraped anything, so it is not anything that's absolutely beautiful. I just scraped it functionally, which basically is like a fancy way to say ghetto scraping, you know? I found the high spots and I kept working the high spots until they were gone and I had a mostly level plane. Again, I was going for function here, so if you look at my scraping, it is not at all up to par, but again, this is the first time I've done it and I wanted to practice on something, and it was an improvement over where it was because we got the machine even flatter on both of these axes. And to be honest, it wasn't that bad. That may have something to do with the fact that it was rebuilt at some point. I'm sure it does, but it wasn't too bad, but I wanted to practice and we did that. So moving right along down, let's see, I replaced, I believe, one of these handles. And then inside the feed box, I don't think anything, oh, no. Okay, yeah, so there's always more issues that are coming back to me. So inside the feed box, we had another major issue, and that is the oil pump wasn't pumping oil inside the feed box. Now, the most important thing is the oil pump was pumping perfectly fine in the main like gearbox, right? The stuff that I didn't touch, and the oil was clean in there, and it is clean in there. But when I pulled the bottom of this out, not the case at all. There was sludge in the bottom, the oil pump was bad, all the lines were clogged. It was hilarious. I think I've had this knee off, the front feed box, whatever they call it, off maybe 30 or 40 times. It's quite hilarious how many times I've had this feed box off. It's quite frustrating at the time, but I can take one of these off and put them on pretty quickly now. And that, the first time I took this thing off, it took me quite a long time. Let me tell you that, because it has to go in a certain way. But yeah, these are not the most intuitive to work on, I will say that, like compared to a Bridgeport or a lathe. Once you figure out why they designed everything, it makes sense. But if you're just, you know, looking at it face value, there were a lot of things where I was definitely scratching my head on. But I took everything apart and reran all new lines and cleaned everything out. The other thing that we did, and this will bring us over to the other side of the machine, over on this side, there's a lot going on over here. So there's an oil pump in here, which controls the oil pump in the knee. And then there's a rapid traverse clutch. So what we did is, I actually took this oil pump out and I rebuilt it like 4 times and could not get it to pump oil. Couldn't do it. And finally, after the 4th or 5th time, I got it taken care of. I surface ground the gears. It's a gear-driven oil pump, and we were able to get all the oil flowing properly. So when you turn on the knee, and I can show you the sight glass, we get oil flow, and it's peeing out oil everywhere, which is exactly what we want. Also, I forgot to mention that there were a couple bearings in the front case that were bad. There's actually squirters going to those bearings, but because they were clogged, it was running dry. So we replaced those bearings, and now we do have oil flow there, which is also good. The rapid traverse clutch arm was broken on this side, and then like we talked about on the other side, there's a pass-through to that quick rapid traverse that was broken. So this I had to braze together, and then on the other side we had to braze together a part over there as well to go ahead and make that work. So over here we had a bunch of fun stuff. So one of the more challenging issues was these telescoping shafts. Now this shaft was broken and bad, and this telescoping shaft was gone. So luckily on my old K&T, I had the shaft from that, the telescoping shafts, and these are actually brass. And it's interesting how they're manufactured because it's a brass sleeve or tube, and then they solder these brass rings onto the tube, both on the outside and then on the inside of the other tube. You can't see that obviously, but it allows you to get a telescopic shafts that have stops, which is great. It's cool design, but the problem is it's extremely hard to replicate. I actually took the one off my old K&T mill and tried to, manufacture these brass rings and solder them on. And if I was an expert at it, I could do it, but multiple attempts I failed miserably. So I was able to utilize half of the old one on my old K&T and half of this one and get this telescopic shaft to work. And then on the front, I actually made a plastic tube for the front, and then it's brass in the back. So it's half brass, half plastic. All right. Now coming down to this telescopic shaft, same story, only it was missing, right? So I didn't have anything to work off of. And I went back and forth on it. Was it going to make it out of aluminum, make it out of brass? And basically the issue that I came up with was I just didn't want to spend $500 or $600 making a shaft. The guy had a hose on it, but the hose just doesn't look good. And so finally I decided I was going to make it out of Delrin because it was pretty cheap. I think it was like $100 in piping. But it still looks original. It's just plastic and it's durable. It's not going to break. So I ended up turning down these sections. It fully telescopes like the original one, and it has steps on the inside to prevent them from falling out. And that was, somewhat interesting. It wasn't too bad. It was a fun little project. And then we went ahead and replaced both of the washers with new leather washers because that's what it had originally. Other than that, on this side, I think that's pretty much it. All right, bringing it down to the worst part of this entire thing, at least the most disgusting part. And that is the oil sump. Now, Steve Summers talked about this when he did his, and that video was him complaining about how difficult it is, and it is. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. There's no two ways about it. I went ahead and cleaned, it's funny because I actually have cleaned out 2 of these, because on my old K&T, which I scrapped, rest in peace, it wasn't worth saving, I cleaned out that one and filled it full of fluid and then never even used it, and then I had to repeat it on this one, and it's the same thing pretty much. But I went ahead, and this is a very arduous process that is very grimy and disgusting. You have to basically reach your hand in here and get to these back areas, and I use a combination of a pressure washer, mineral spirits at times, a vacuum, all kinds of stuff to just suck all the gunk out, to scoop it out with your hand, all kinds of stuff. And then there's a channel that runs all the way from here all the way to the back with a drain, like a clean out. It's just like a plate in the back. I don't know why anyone would even undo that. Basically, if you undo that, all this stuff just runs out the back. So there's not really a good way to get this out of here. Some guys have put like a ball valve on the back, which is great, but in reality, it's just because of the way this is designed, it has a low spot back there, but if you put a ball valve, you're gonna drain like maybe down to 1/4 of it just because of the location. The best thing to do here is to suck it out with something like a Freddy and then clean it out every once in a while. But I don't have one of those yet. So this fluid is brand new, it's clean, it's good, and it's ready to go. And I've run so much stuff through here that the inside of this is as clean as it's ever gonna be, which is great. So, and on the same topic of that, I actually rebuilt the oil pump for the base here, for the cutting oil, and that required the same type of stuff that I did on the other oil pump, and I'll kind of show you here. All right, so this is the oil pump for the base, or whatever you want to call it, where all the oil's at. Now there's 2 issues here, well, more than 2 issues, but I'll talk about 2. So the first thing when you look at these is the oil pump is engaged with this little like collar, and it like slides up and then it slides down, there you go, like that, and it engages a dog on there and it spins. So Keith Rucker did a video on this, and a lot of times these dogs wear out. So what I did is I took this off and I did a weld buildup on both pieces and built it up and remachined it so that way when they come together they interlock properly. That was the first thing. And then I rebuilt this pump, which is also a gear pump. So we did the same thing. We pulled all the shafts out. I did new bushings, you know, machined them up, pressed them in so that they're not all, you know, wallered out. So everything was tight. And then I went ahead and did the surface grinder on the gears on this and got this working well. And this also was a pain in the butt. And both oil pumps that I worked on were a pain in the butt because I was having issues getting them to be primed. And I know Steve Summers did a video on these and he was having the same issue as well. These are supposed to be self-priming pumps, and I feel like they are when they're working properly, but he wasn't able to get his to self-prime. Luckily, on all three oil pumps in here, the one for the knee, the one in the gearbox, and the one down here, I got them all to work factory, which is great. But it just took a lot of surface grinding, a lot of trial and error to get the clearance right. So now when I come over here, and I'll show you guys this when we do our first job, I engage this, it turns this on full time, and it will pump coolant without being primed. And then up here at the top, I went ahead and made this bracket kind of cool because it clamps onto the arm, and I have it tight right now, but just with an Allen key I can loosen this and I can slide this forward and backward. And then I've got a double nozzle here with valve shutoffs so I can spray onto the cutter. It's really, really cool. And then I got these really nice flat tips, and it sprays tons of oil when I turn it on, and it works amazing. And I think that's the beauty about this machine is it is really old school, but they really did think of everything at the time, right? So when you're making your cut and you're doing a cut with your horizontal cutter, you can be blasting it with cutting oil, and then it runs down into the trays and then drips down here and then runs down to the base, and it recycles. And then whatever comes into here runs down into that telescopic tube into the base, and it recycles it. And obviously you got to clean it out, but it's really cool. It's before they had coolant and all that kind of stuff. It just allowed you to have constant cutting oil and continue to recycle it, and it's just really cool. So the fact that we have that working back as it was before, and then we have a little bit newer tech with these flex hoses is kind of cool. We kind of get the best of both worlds. So I'm really excited that that is working, and we're gonna put that to work as well. Over here at the motor, pretty standard stuff, nothing too crazy. We went ahead and in 4 brand new belts. The motor itself was fine. The motor needed no attention. Actually, I think the motor didn't need attention, but there was a mount that was broken, so we did fix that. I took off the feed box here, which transmits the power going down over. We took that out and did new bushings in there. And then there's an overrunning clutch in here that's known to go bad and slip. So we actually took that apart and replaced, I think there's like a bunch of springs and a bunch of balls, if I remember right. We replaced that. I know Keith Rucker did that on his. He's got a video on that. But other than that, no real issues. I think this piece was broken, this cast piece, but I was able to take it off my 2K, and it's the same part. But yeah, most of the work we did in this region was the oiling pump, or the oil pump, and then just the normal maintenance on the belts. Also, a little side detail, but these telescopic plates, they were all broken and they were all fallen down. So I had to take these apart, and they're an interesting design because they're like welded screws with slots, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, so that they can slot next to each other. So I forget how I fixed those, but they weren't working, and now they're working great, which is really nice because chips can come over here, and there's I think there's not a screw, but a spinning shaft or a screw back there, and it just allows this knee to move up and down without any chips getting in there. So we fixed that as well. This came with the machine, and it was on a really janky arm setup. Again, it was fine, but I'm a little overkill. And so I used an extra arm from my new all kit from the other milling machine, and then made this custom adapter bracket so that we could mount it. And then we got it all cleaned up. It was dirty, but it cleaned up real nice. And then I did a real nice cord set up so that we didn't have cords everywhere. I went ahead and remounted all 3 scales, so it does have X, Y, and Z, and made sure all of them were dialed in. I was on the phone with Acu-Rite, just making sure that I had the right parts and that everything was accurate. And I checked it, and this is accurate, you know, within a thousandths or better. And for this machine, completely fine. This is going to be just an absolute joy to have. And actually, I haven't even turned it on in a while. Let's see. Do I have it plugged in? Yep, I do. Perfect. Yeah, it's an older one, but it works. There it is. Yeah, you got to hit any key. Press any key to continue. There you go. So you can kind of see how it works, and then I'll operate this. All right. There we go. There it is. Just give you a shot of my amateur scraping job here and kind of show you. This machine is a little stiff, which I set it intentionally so there was no movement. And these machines are a little heavier duty, so I didn't want it to have quite the light touch that my Bridgeport had. I'd rather have it be a little bit on the accurate side and a little stiffer, because when you run all the feeds, there's a lot of power in each direction, so it runs just great. But it takes a little bit extra movement at the handle than your Bridgeport or something like that. And I think that's probably normal based on the size of this machine. So this vise was actually from my other milling machine, and it did not look like this. Man, it was a disaster, just like most things. And what we did is we completely disassembled it. I remachined this entire flat area here, and then remachined the bottom of this, and then we sleeved it, and then we bored it, so that way we could move the bushing up, the nut actually, we could move it up this direction so that it would still be in line. So this is machined, and I machined this top, just to keep it consistent. And then we did a whole new screw here, so I machined a brand new screw. The old screw had a bunch of holes in it, and it was just destroyed. We also did new jaws here, and I machined and then surface ground these jaws, and then I installed them and then machined them installed so that they would be perfectly parallel. I think that was the bulk of it. I think we did a new bearing in here, and then obviously we painted everything. But yeah, this was a pretty fun little project because we remachined the ways, it was all scored up, and now it's pretty much good to go. I needed a vise for this, and at the time I wanted to buy a bunch of like Kurt DX8s, but those are pretty pricey, and I had this, so I just put the time in and we restored this. And it looks great on the machine, it works great. It doesn't have a handle. I had a square before, so we got a square socket so I can use a socket, so I do need to get a handle for it. But other than that, yeah, it turned out really, really nice, and I'm really happy with it. We have the overarm support here, and there's, I think, 3 models, an A, B, and a C. Someone will correct me. I'm pretty sure there's an A and a B, maybe not a C. I don't remember, it's been quite a while. But one of the models is like a closer fit down here, and then I think another model has like a different bearing size. But this overarm support has an upgraded bearing here. I was talking to Ron about this, and it's like an updated part or whatever. I think there was originally a bushing, but in here there actually is a bearing, and so I didn't do much with that. We did a new sight glass. If I had any more of these, or if I can find any, I would like to get a couple more of these overarm supports, especially so I could run one in the center. But really what I would love to get is a vertical head. So that's on my list of things to get. But I was glad to have this overarm support. Sometimes they're missing, and I was glad to have this overarm support and not the other one, because this one I think has the bigger bearing. And I think the C has a spot to mount. There's like an X brace or something you can see in the catalog to give even more support for heavy machining. So this is kind of like the most used one, and this is the one that we have. Other than that pretty much wraps up the K&T mill as far as talking about it. But I'm sure many of you guys are wondering what sparked this interest to get this machine going and get it used. And the reason for that is we have a job for it. We're restoring the arbor press over here, but in order to do that, we have to machine a part that I can't figure out how to do it other than trying to do a faux line boring single point cutter setup. And the machine to do that, other than the shaper, which actually would be perfect, but it's down right now, is in the horizontal mill. And so the mill was already done, of course, it was sitting here. So I literally had to get it cleaned up for the video. And then we made this boring bar, which I have a separate video on, and we got it set up. So our first cuts, unfortunately, because it kind of sucks, our first cuts are going to be a single point boring cut, which is going to suck because it doesn't let us know like how the machine operates, because it's you know, even if the machine was working perfectly, that's going to be a cut that's not going to be fun to do anyway, because it's going to be on A2 steel and it's going to be slow. But nonetheless, that's the first job that we have for this. So I'm excited to actually put it to work and to get it running. So the next time you'll see this in operation, it'll be doing that job where we're doing a single point cutter and we're trying to repair that paw for the arbor press. So I'm gonna fire it up just so you can kind of see how it runs, and yeah, go from there. All right, so I haven't fired this up in probably a year, but I have no doubt that it won't fire up well and operate great. So here we go. Fires right up. We're building oil pressure. Boom, we got oil pressure there. Dripping down there. Down at the knee, it's already running, which is great. So we're good to go. So start the spindle, we're at 15 RPM. I don't have any feeds on, I don't believe. Nope, we're good to go. So let's start up our spindle. We got our tool mounted in there. So we're running at 15 RPM. Nothing too exciting. All right. Let's bump it up to 1500. That's what everyone wants to see, right? There we go, 1500. Runs like a top. And I should have put oil in there. I'm just doing this for the demo. There's like an oil feed. I had it dry because I didn't want it sitting on the shelf just leaking out, because it just leaks and lubricates that. So I do need to do that. That would probably quiet this up a little bit, but other than that, the machine itself runs really nice, except for that bearing being. So yeah, other than that, I'm very happy with how this machine turned out. We have oil flow in all the sight classes. Everything is operating as it should. We got oil flow down there. Everything is clean, lubricated, and ready to work. There it is, we got that bearing fixed. I'll show you some of the power feeds. All right. So we're going left. All right. We're going right. Going forward, back. Going down and forward. All right. Going up. Everything runs really nice. And then, you know, we got our slow feed. I think we're at half an inch a minute. So yeah, not very fast, but we're going. Yep, right there. Beautiful. really happy with how it turned out. So thank you guys for tuning in for the video, and we'll catch you on the next one.